The moment I opened my husband's old metal box in the attic, what sent a chill through me wasn't the stack of paperwork. It was the unfinished letter he had written. It turned out that for a long time, in David's eyes, I was no longer a mother who needed to be protected. I was just a burden that had to be quietly moved out of sight. In the haze of dust and that gray late afternoon light, all the kindness he had shown me for so long suddenly revealed itself for what it really was: a cruel performance. But David had made one mistake. He forgot who I was before I became a frail old woman. Don't scroll past this, because my answer to what he did is only just beginning. My name is Charlotte Whitmore. I am 65 years old. I have been a widow for 2 years. I live alone in the old house in Connecticut, the one William and I held on to by stretching every bill. From the outside, people would probably think I had a peaceful life. A big house, a beautiful rose garden, a greenhouse full of herbs, some savings, rainy afternoons reading by the window. I won't deny any of that. It's just that my peace was never joy. It was the kind of silence a woman left behind by loss has no choice but to learn how to live with. William died too fast. That morning he was still standing in front of the mirror shaving, asking whether I was making cod for dinner. By noon he had collapsed right in his study. Everything after that rushed past me like a hailstorm. The ambulance, the hospital hallway, the sound of doctors' shoes, the pity in their eyes. When I came home and opened the kitchen door to the smell of the morning coffee still hanging in the air, I understood that my life had split in two in that moment. For the past 2 years, I have lived by routine. Up at 6 a.m. to boil water, feed the cat, write down expenses in my brown leather notebook. Grocery shopping on Wednesdays, call Laura on Fridays, visit the cemetery on Sundays. I held on to those little things the way people feel for stones in a swamp, just trying not to sink. David, my oldest son, lives in Manhattan with his wife and 2 children. Laura, my younger daughter, works for a publishing house in Boston. To be honest, I have always been closer to Laura. She is direct, gentle, and terrible at hiding how she feels. David is different. He is smart, capable, always the most decisive person in the room. When he was little, that steadiness made me proud. But as he grew older, that same quality sometimes became exhausting. After William's funeral, David started showing up more often. He called regularly, stopped by the house, reminded me to replace the furnace filter and not climb ladders in the greenhouse by myself. A lonely mother can be very easy to move with that kind of attention. I believed him. I really did believe in his concern. But David's questions rarely stayed simple. They always slid toward numbers. How were the property taxes this year? Was anyone managing the lake house yet? Should I sell part of the land behind the house? You should gather all the paperwork into one place, Mom, he said one night while pouring wine, his eyes drifting toward the window like we were discussing the weather. At your age, the simpler your assets are, the better. Less trouble later on. At your age. I remember giving a small laugh. The phrase sounded like someone talking about an antique that was starting to get hard to maintain. But I let it go. Older people often develop a dangerous reflex, telling ourselves we are being too sensitive, that our children are only worried about us. Sometimes that kind of generosity comes from love, and sometimes it comes from fear of facing a truth too painful to hold. The gray metal box was tucked behind a stack of tax files and one of William's old wool blankets in the attic. That day, the cold had that raw, late-winter Connecticut bite. I had gone up there planning to sort through the paperwork before moving it to the bank vault when I found it. William had been meticulous. He labeled everything himself, organized each file with different colored clips. House papers, insurance, taxes, all separated with perfect clarity. For 2 years, I had not been able to touch that pile. I was afraid of disturbing the last order he had left behind, afraid of losing the warmth of a man who had lived so neatly. The box was heavier than I expected, and it wasn't locked. Inside were copies of property papers, account lists, appointment notes with attorney Martin Keene, and a handwritten letter on the familiar cream-colored stationery William always used. It was not some tearful farewell. It read more like a note he had started before planning to call his lawyer. Charlotte, I'm going to speak with Martin again about a few of the assets. I hope I'm just being overly cautious, but lately David seems more interested in control than in your safety. Maybe it's only his habit of bringing his work habits home. I hope I'm wrong. If I don't get the chance to tell you directly, then at least remember this. Don't sign anything just because someone tells you it's the simplest way. Don't let anyone make you feel like a burden just because you still want to make your own decisions about your life. I will. That was where the letter stopped. Just those 2 words. The pen stroke dragged sideways and then cut off sharply, as if the phone had rung or someone had walked into the room. Maybe William meant to come back and finish it, but he never got another chance. I sat down hard on the attic floor and let the cold from the wood sink into my knees. I read the letter again and again until I had gone through it 3 times. Strangely, I didn't cry. Fear does not always arrive in tears. Sometimes it arrives as a terrible silence, a feeling that everything around you has suddenly pulled away, leaving you alone in the middle of your own house. William was not the kind of man who dramatized things. If he had written it down, then it had been weighing on him for a long time. But what chilled me most was his hesitation. He was still hoping he was wrong. That hope told me he had not yet found ironclad proof strong enough to confront our son. But inside him, the unease had already started screaming. Once that suspicion had been spoken out loud, I knew I would never be able to look at David the same way again. If by this point you're starting to feel that something is off too, the way I did back then, leave a 1 in the comments. I want to know how many people sense the truth before it finally comes out. 3 days later, David called. "Mom?" His voice was soft, and I could practically hear the smile behind it. I was thinking, we've missed too much since Dad died. For your birthday this year, I want to do something special. Let's all go up to Manhattan for dinner. The Riverton, that restaurant overlooking the river you like. Vanessa and the kids want to come too. Laura too, if she can make it. You've had a hard time for a long time, Mom. You deserve to be spoiled a little this birthday. If that call had come before I found the letter, I probably would have softened. I might even have blamed myself for being too harsh with him. But now all I heard was that sweetness, so smooth it felt fake. Everything was fitting together a little too neatly, at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way, as if David were staging a family performance to clear the path for something else. That sounds nice. So we're set? Next Saturday? I'll have to check my schedule. Mom, he laughed, you're acting like you're busier than the president. No, I said, but at my age, people tend to like checking their schedules carefully before promising anything. David laughed louder, but I caught the tiniest pause before it came, the slight stumble of someone who had just lost his footing. 20 minutes later, Vanessa texted me. Mom, don't forget to bring some of Dad's old things. David thought we could make a little family memory corner for the kids. It sounded perfectly kind. If I repeated it to someone else, they would probably tell me I was getting paranoid. But that was exactly what made me uneasy. Vanessa had never cared about family keepsakes. She was the kind of woman who only touched things that made the picture frame of her perfect family look prettier. William's old belongings were definitely not on that list. I read the message 3 times. Then I decided to call Eleanor Price. Eleanor is an old friend of mine. She used to be a psychologist. She is retired now, but she still has that habit of going quiet at just the right moment, so the other person ends up speaking the truth out loud. If there was anyone calm enough to hear me out without deciding I had gone paranoid from grief, it was Eleanor. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment after I finished telling her everything. Charlotte, she said at last, has David been bringing up the assets a lot lately? Or asking things in a way that feels like he's testing your memory? That question yanked open a drawer in my mind that had been stuck for months. Yes, far too often. I told Eleanor about all the times David had eagerly steered the conversation toward the house and the finances, and about the lunch when he brought along some estate planner named Richard Hale. The man wore an expensive watch and tossed around glossy phrases like tax optimization, preserving legacy, minimizing risk. The 2 men sat there wrapping their language around me like they were packaging an item, while I quietly finished my salad, feeling bothered more than cared for. I just want you to see the big picture, Mom, David had said then. Whose big picture? I had asked lightly. He smiled, but his eyes never answered. Then I remembered the medical appointment in Manhattan a few months earlier. David had insisted on booking it, saying I had been forgetting little things lately and needed a routine evaluation. I hated that appointment from the first few minutes. The doctor was polite, but the questions felt like they were guiding me down a narrow hallway. Every time I hesitated, David would add something. Mom loses her keys all the time. Last week, she even called the neighbor by the wrong name. I had turned and looked at my son, and there had been something on his face too polished, too eager. At the time, I was only angry. But now, sitting there with Eleanor, I could finally put the pieces together. David wasn't only going after the money. He was slowly trying to strip away the last authority I had left, the right to be seen as a sound-minded woman. That was the moment I stopped blaming myself for reading too much into things. It wasn't that I was too sensitive. It was that some pain stands right in front of your face, and still you have to look at it again and again until your eyes ache before you dare believe it is real. I hung up the phone, and my palms were ice cold. A jumble of feelings rose in me. Humiliation, pain, but also a strange clarity. Humiliation, because I was the woman who had sat up all night when he had a fever, the one who used to cut apples into little slices for him. Pain, because if I was right, then this was no longer a simple disagreement between mother and son. I did not sleep that night. Lying there, listening to the wind strike the branches outside my window, I thought about every time I had told myself, he's probably just worried about Mom. A mother can lie to herself with love longer than anyone else can. But once that trust starts to crack, the sound of it rings painfully, even in the middle of the night's silence. The next morning, I called David back. "I've changed my mind," I said the moment he answered. "I knew it," he said, his voice lighting up. "Your table at the Riverton is waiting. I don't want to go that far. I've been a little tired lately, and I don't feel like making the trip into Manhattan. How about this weekend? All of you come here to Connecticut instead. I'll cook dinner at home. It'll be warmer, more intimate." There was a pause on the other end of the line, brief enough that anyone else might have missed it. But I am his mother. I have known every kind of silence my son can make since before he was tall enough to reach my shoulder. "What's wrong, Mom?" "I just want to stay home." "That's fine. Honestly, that sounds great." That easy agreement made me even more certain I had not imagined any of it. He needed a plan he could keep within reach, and the moment I steered the conversation in another direction, he adjusted instantly instead of pushing back. The restaurant had never been the real point. Neither had the river view. I was not foolish enough to confront him over the phone, and I certainly was not going to complain to relatives and turn myself into the frail old woman who imagines things. I quietly moved everything back onto my own turf. Literally. For the entire week after that, Eleanor and I prepared in silence. No dramatic midnight digging through drawers. Just ordinary things, done carefully and in order. I met with Martin Keene, our family lawyer of nearly 30 years. Martin is the sort of man who has no patience for drama. He believes in numbers and clearly documented paper trails. I laid William's unfinished letter on his desk. After reading it, Martin removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly, and looked at me. "What would you like me to do?" "I want every file reviewed. And from now on, I don't want anyone signing or changing anything unless it comes directly from my own mouth." He did not ask whether I was sure. He only nodded. "I understand." At Eleanor's advice, I also had my cognitive function evaluated by an independent doctor in New Haven. Not because I doubted myself, but because I understood something simple. In these kinds of battles, feelings are not enough. You need paper. I had cameras with audio installed in the living room and the hallway on the excuse that the house was big and there had been strange delivery people lately. Every night, under the yellow light over the dining table, I sat down and wrote out every time David had steered the conversation toward the assets, every time he had mentioned simplifying things or long-term safety. Every date, place, and witness was written down clearly. I did not want to believe my son meant me harm. That conclusion was too heavy, the kind of thing that can leave a person paralyzed with grief. But I was clear-headed enough to understand one practical truth. If I was being overly cautious, none of this would hurt anything. And if I was right, it might save my life. By Friday afternoon, David and his family arrived in Connecticut. The tires crunched over the gravel, then the car doors slammed. Sophie ran in to hug me, her embrace carrying that shy awkwardness of a 12-year-old starting to grow self-conscious. Liam bolted straight into the backyard. Vanessa carried a store-bought lemon tart from the city, and David brought wine. He bent to kiss my cheek, the smell of expensive cologne mixed with the cold air outside. "You look better than I expected, Mom." A casual sentence, but I could hear the barb hidden inside it. "Well, that must be disappointing for you." He laughed, too. If the children had not been standing there, I doubt the smile on his face would have lasted. For the first 2 days, everything looked like a family should. The children ran around, Vanessa helped clear the table, David fiddled with the back gate that had been sticking. I made the beef stew William used to love. Sophie asked about old photographs, and Liam spilled apple juice all over the tablecloth and looked as if he had caused a national disaster. I had to fight hard not to view everything through suspicion. That was the most painful part. The person trying to maneuver against you can still carry your chair, uncork your wine, and tell stories over dinner like a devoted son. But I had woken up, and when a woman stops lying to herself, she starts seeing a great many things. Both David and Vanessa showed far too much interest in things that had nothing to do with them. "You still use this filing cabinet, Mom?" Vanessa asked from William's study, lightly running her fingers along the drawer like she was admiring a decorative piece. "Yes." "You should really digitize all of this, just in case something happens." "What kind of something?" "Oh, you know, these days." Another time, David stood staring at the key rack by the back door. "Who has the key to the lake house now, Mom?" "I do. Just you?" "One person is enough." He nodded, but his eyes stayed there longer than they needed to. After Saturday lunch, while I was slicing bread in the kitchen, David leaned against the counter, bracing one hand on it, looking at me as if he were just making casual conversation. "Did you renew the homeowner's insurance yet, Mom?" "I did." "So where do you keep the paperwork?" "Why are you asking that?" "Just in case, if there were ever a fire or something." "If there's a fire, I'll call the insurance company. I just want to make sure you're on top of everything." "Son," I said, setting the knife down on the table slowly, "I've known how to deal with insurance since before you knew how to tie your shoes." David laughed out loud and raised both hands in a playful little gesture of surrender. Vanessa, sitting in the living room, laughed too. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a warm, ordinary family moment. I was the only one who could feel his questions lining up in my mind like a long row of calculations. Saturday night, after the kids had gone upstairs, David pulled a dark blue folder out of his briefcase. He wasn't pushy. He didn't pressure me. He did everything with the polished ease of a lawyer handing out a favor. "I've got something here," he said. "Just a rough draft. Read through it when you have time. You don't need to decide anything tonight." The first few pages looked completely harmless at a glance. An asset management outline, a home maintenance cost sheet, a few suggestions for hiring someone to look after the lake house. The language was neat, sensible, very reasonable. Anyone skimming it would probably have thought David was a devoted son, carefully looking out for his mother. But the further I read, the more the wording began to shift. Broad authorization, authority to act on financial decisions on behalf of the owner if the owner experienced limitations in capacity or practical ability to manage things. A section proposing consolidated access to original documents to make sure the operation of the assets would not be interrupted. Limitations in capacity, practical ability to manage things. Those phrases were not loud or dramatic. They lay there quietly on the page, clean and legal. But they were as cold and sharp as velvet-wrapped steel wire. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not stupid. And most importantly, I had read William's letter. I looked up at my son. David still had that same smile on his face. Vanessa, strangely, had gone silent, her hands tightly clasped together. Her makeup was flawless, every inch of her polished, but the skin at her neck had started to flush red. I closed the folder. "I'm going to have Martin look this over first." David's smile tightened for a second. Just a second. If I hadn't been his mother, I probably would have missed it. But I've known that face since it was red and newborn. I know exactly what he looks like when he's lying, or when he's trying to cover something up. "Of course," David said, immediately slipping back into that gentle tone. "I just thought if you wanted to start getting things in order early, then—" "Martin will look at it." "Mom, really, these are just standard forms." "Martin will look at it." A heavy silence dropped over the room. The dishwasher hummed in the kitchen. The wind against the glass door sounded startlingly loud. Vanessa spoke first, like someone hurrying to throw a cloth over a crack in the table. "I think that's the right thing to do, Mom. Better to look it over carefully." David turned and shot his wife a quick look. It wasn't agreement. It was the look of a man whose own side had just knocked him off course. Then I knew enough. The issue wasn't that he wanted to help me. The issue was that he was ready to strip his mother of her independence the moment I made the mistake of putting my signature down. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Around 11 p.m., there was a knock at my bedroom door. It was Sophie. She cracked the door open, clutching her worn old teddy bear against her chest. She's gotten so big already. At school, I'm sure she'd never let anyone know she still held on to that childish habit. "Are you still awake, Grandma?" "I'm here." She came in quietly and sat on the edge of the bed. One look at her face told me this wasn't the look of a child who had gotten into trouble. It was the face of a child trying to process something far beyond what she should have had to understand. "Grandma," she whispered, "I don't want Mom and Dad to be upset with me. I don't want you caught in the middle because of me, Sophie." "I'm not caught in the middle," she said, pressing her lips together, twisting one of the teddy bear's ears in her hands. "It's just, earlier, I went downstairs to get some water, and I accidentally heard Mom and Dad talking in the living room. I didn't hear everything, but I heard Dad say, 'If Grandma won't agree, then we'll have to do it another way.' I felt my hand tighten against the blanket. And then Mom said something about the doctor from last time, but Dad said, that still wasn't enough. I didn't push her for more, and I had no desire to turn my granddaughter into an informant. Children should never be dragged into these dark corners of adult life. But the words "another way" and "not enough" hit me like cold water. They fit perfectly with everything I had been afraid of. "Are you scared?" I asked softly. I don't know what they're planning, but the way they were talking, it scared me. I reached over and stroked her hair. "I know. Thank you for telling me. Are you okay?" I looked at her. She was my granddaughter, but she was also David's daughter. Inside her was that painful tug of war between a child's natural loyalty to her parents and this new fear just beginning to grow. In that moment, I was angry at David not because of those lifeless papers, but because he had let his own child overhear scheming words inside her grandmother's house. "I'm okay. Go get some sleep. It's all right." After the door closed, I just sat there in silence. What I had at that point wasn't enough for a lawsuit, and it certainly wasn't enough to expose David to the family, or tell Laura that her brother was quietly laying the groundwork to turn his own mother into a confused old woman. But it was more than enough for me to know that I was not allowed to go soft for even one more minute. Looking out the window, I finally had to accept a bitter truth. David wasn't just after the money. He wanted to take away his mother's voice, too. Sunday morning, I still made breakfast like always. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange marmalade. Sophie was quieter than usual, and every so often Vanessa gave her a probing look. David, meanwhile, acted as if nothing had happened. His talent for performance, honestly, has always made me admire him and fear him at the same time. When they were all getting into the car to head back to the city, David hugged me on the porch. "I just want things to be easier for you, Mom." I didn't push him away, but I didn't hug him back the way I used to either. "Easier for who, David?" He pulled back a little, looked at me, and smiled. "For everyone, Mom." Hearing those words come out of his mouth, it sounded less like reassurance and more like a warning. When the car disappeared down the gravel road, I went back inside, locked the door, and leaned against it. My whole body started trembling. Since William died, that was the first time I had truly felt alone. Not the loneliness of having no one beside me, but the loneliness of being betrayed by the very blood you raised. It forced me to look back over my whole life as a mother and ask myself where I had gone wrong, what I had missed. But the answer was all darkness. For the next 3 weeks, I got to work like a craftswoman repairing a cracked foundation. No noise, no stomping around. I quietly sealed every opening with paperwork and time. The first week, I went to see a psychologist on my own. Her name was Helen Morris, and she greeted me in a low, steady voice. David wasn't sitting beside me, and there was no one there jumping in to correct what I said. She asked me about everything, from what I had noticed on the drive there that morning to old memories from years ago. I even told her about nearly forgetting my glasses on the kitchen counter and joked that it probably cost me points on the test. She laughed. On the contrary, it shows me you still observe yourself very well. After 2 hours, she closed the file and said, "You are fully of sound mind. There are no signs of cognitive decline affecting your ability to make your own personal decisions." I wasn't surprised, but my nose still stung. Knowing it for yourself is one thing. Having it confirmed in black and white is something else. I held that evaluation in my hands like a shield. The second week, Martin and I went back through all the assets. The house I live in, the lake house, the investments, anything that could be exploited, anything that needed a fence built around it. We turned it all over. I've always hated sitting for hours with dry paperwork, but this time I studied every word carefully. Martin suggested moving the assets into a tightly structured trust with independent oversight. I signed each page, feeling both hurt and clear-headed. Hurt because I had to guard myself against my own son, but clear because I knew this was the only way to save myself. The third week, Martin pulled everything together into one file so I could save myself. He clipped it all together, the doctor's evaluation, William's letter, and the folder David had once given me. "I don't want to frighten you," Martin said as he flipped through the pages. "But things like this usually start with very kind, thoughtful questions. Outsiders are easily fooled by that respectable image." "I know. You're doing very well." I never thought that at this age I'd be praised for having to defend myself against my own child. Once every legal door had been firmly locked, I made my next move. I didn't send an accusation letter or stir up drama with the family. I sent a formal ethics inquiry to the professional conduct department at David's firm. He's a lawyer. He understands better than anyone the weight language carries in that world. I wanted him to face the very weapon he had been using. In the letter, I attached every piece of evidence, the documents he gave me, the timeline of his approach to my assets, even the audio from the camera that night. David's voice came through low but unmistakably clear. "If Mom doesn't agree, then we'll have to do it another way." And Vanessa's voice. "What about the doctor from last time?" I did not demand immediate discipline. I included only one brief line. "I would like to know whether what my son is doing is consistent with the standards expected of a lawyer, or whether he is simply using that knowledge to outmaneuver his own mother." In the end, I asked Martin to call everyone into his office. Everyone was there. David and Vanessa, Laura, Uncle Peter, and Aunt Judith. The people who had understood William's wishes more clearly than anyone. David came because he believed he still had room to turn things around. He believed that with his calm, rational voice, his professional language, and the authority of a successful lawyer, he could once again steer the story wherever he wanted it to go. I arrived 15 minutes early. The conference room smelled of paperwork and stale coffee. There was nothing dramatic about it, but that plain, dry atmosphere made me feel steadier. Real-life justice doesn't always need spectacle. Sometimes it sits right there inside thick folders like these. David came in last with Vanessa. He was wearing a gray suit and a navy tie, his face calm and unreadable. But when he saw Peter and Judith there, his step faltered just a little. Very quickly, the polished smile of a lawyer returned to his face. "I didn't expect such a full house today." "That's a good thing," I said evenly. "I think family matters should be made clear from the beginning." Laura was sitting 2 chairs away from her brother. She kept staring at me, her face full of unease. I didn't know what she was thinking, but from the moment she agreed to come, her voice on the phone had sounded different. I think she had already caught the scent of something wrong, even if she couldn't name it yet. Once everyone had sat down, Martin got straight to the point. He said the meeting was to clarify several matters related to my assets after William's death, and to formally record the new legal decisions I had just put in place. David curved his lip into a faint, dismissive smile. "That sounds like a dramatic overstatement of what this really is." "How serious it is," Martin replied, "can be left to the documents." He signaled for his assistant to place a folder in front of each person. I looked at David's hands as he opened his folder. Long fingers, clean hands, the same hands that used to clutch at my shirt on his first day of school. Memory is a troublesome thing. It always seems to intrude at the exact moment when you need to be most resolute. Inside that folder was everything. The draft David had given me, with the trap language highlighted, Martin's detailed explanation of what authority those clauses would actually strip away from me, and Helen's evaluation confirming that I was fully of sound mind. David flipped through a few pages and then laughed. A dry, scoffing laugh from a man who could not believe he was being put on trial over something so minor. "Mom? Seriously? This is just basic preparation. A draft. I didn't force you to sign anything. The document says otherwise," Martin cut in. "You're just interpreting it in the worst possible way." "I'm reading it according to its plain legal meaning." David turned to me. "Mom, you know me. There's no way I'd ever do anything to hurt you." If he had said that a year earlier, it probably would have softened me. But sitting there in that room full of people, all I felt was tired. Not the sharp pain anymore, just that deep exhaustion that comes from listening to a promise whose owner long ago hollowed it out from the inside. "Yes," I said quietly. "I used to think that too." The whole room seemed to sink a little at that. Martin didn't argue further. He simply read aloud exactly what David had drafted. Here, this line. "The representative shall have full decision-making authority when the owner experiences limitations in practical managerial capacity." That phrase is far too broad, David. It is broad enough for someone to argue that Mrs. Whitmore is no longer competent if they happen to have some convenient medical evaluation in hand. "There was no fabricated evaluation here at all," David snapped. Martin calmly turned to the next page. "Interesting that you chose the word fabricated." Vanessa turned to look at her husband. That look had changed completely. It was no longer the smooth coordination of two people performing on stage together. She seemed to be wondering whether the man sitting beside her had gone much further than she had realized. Then Martin pressed play on the recording. The room went silent. The speaker crackled a little, but every word came through clearly. "If Mom doesn't agree, then we'll have to do it another way. What about the doctor from last time? Not enough yet." For a few seconds after the recording ended, no one said a word. Uncle Peter was the first to speak. "David, if this is how you plan to treat your mother, then this is not care. This is control. This is taking something from her." Laura sat frozen. I looked at my daughter. For the first time, she was no longer looking at her brother like a successful role model, or the person who always had the right answer ready. She was looking at David as if she were trying to fit a stranger's face onto her brother's body. David sat up straight, trying to recover. "That's just a recording clipped out of context." "I would love to know what kind of context," Judith said, "could make not enough yet after your mother's memory exam sound decent." David turned to Vanessa as if expecting backup, but she just stayed silent, head lowered over the file, her face visibly drained of color. I looked straight at my son. What I was about to say would be the most painful knife of all, for him and for me. Once I said it, this bond between mother and son would never be the same again. But some truths have to be called by their real name before they can finally end. "What I can never forgive," I said, "isn't that you wanted money?" David blinked, clearly thrown. "It's that you were cold enough to clear the way for the day your mother would be treated like someone no longer lucid enough to say no to you." I had seen David win his way through everything, from school to work. He had always been good at keeping a calm face in every argument. But that sentence changed his eyes. A flash of anger mixed with panic ran across them. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean when you jumped in to correct every answer I gave during that exam? When you had another way ready if I didn't obey? When you told your wife that exam result was not enough yet?" He couldn't argue another word. That was it. His power to arrange everything from that point on was no longer in his hands. The room did not shake or explode. Real life rarely comes with screaming scenes like the movies. Things just break quietly. The looks in the room began to shift. People were silently reassessing the man sitting in front of them. David still tried to maneuver, saying this was all just a misunderstanding, that I had become unstable from grief after William's death, that those clauses were just standard legal templates. But this time, no one believed that smooth voice anymore. Laura asked softly, "Did you ever fully explain what those clauses meant to Mom?" David looked at his sister, stunned. Uncle Peter shook his head in disgust. Aunt Judith folded her arms in silence, and Eleanor looked at David with the eyes of a doctor studying an X-ray so clear there was nothing left to debate. Vanessa finally spoke, but only to save herself. I think I didn't understand the full situation when I heard him explain it." "Vanessa." "No," she said. You told me it was a normal asset management plan. You never said it included language that could open the door to taking away your mother's legal rights." The silence after that was the true final period. The meeting ended in an atmosphere so heavy it felt unreal. No one pounded the table. No one slammed a door. People just quietly stood up, gathered their papers, and left without meeting each other's eyes. I knew that from that day forward, David would never again walk into a family room with the status of the accomplished golden son. The file from that day would follow him like a shadow for the rest of his life. The consequences did not hit all at once. They seeped in slowly, taking away one thing at a time that David had once assumed was secure. The Bar Association demanded an explanation, and that alone was enough to shake his law firm's sense of stability and reputation. He was removed from major cases. Clients asked for different attorneys. In the profession, nobody said it out loud, but the distance began to show. For a lawyer, that was the deepest wound. Martin updated me in the simplest possible terms. "They're taking it very seriously." "I don't need the details," I sighed, looking out at the garden through his office window. "I didn't do this to destroy him." "I know, but consequences don't always depend on what the person reporting them wants." As for Vanessa, she was not innocent. She had gone along with it. She had staged this with her husband. But that meeting showed me she had not realized David had gone as far as he had. 3 weeks later, Vanessa's name appeared on my phone. I had almost decided not to answer. Her voice was hoarse. "Mom, I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know, the kids and I have moved in with my parents for a while." "I didn't know everything," she said in a rush. "I just thought David wanted to take the lead in protecting the family. I had no idea the section about your capacity was like that. I didn't understand until I heard Martin explain it. That's when I was horrified." On the other end of the line, all I could hear was a long, tired exhale. "I'm not saying this to wash my hands of responsibility. It's just, I couldn't sit still anymore." I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to tell her that not knowing does not clean hands that were already involved. But another part of me, the part that had lived long enough to understand that people can slide into wrongdoing simply by trusting someone far too convincing, held me back. "How are the kids?" "They're okay. Sophie especially. She sort of knows something is wrong. Don't force her to choose a side." "I know." I did not thank her, and I did not forgive her. We ended the call in one of those gray zones life creates, where no one is completely clean, but at least someone was frightened enough to stop. A month and a half later, David came to see me alone. It was drizzling. He sat in the car for a long time before getting out. Through the window, I could see the slump in his shoulders, the fatigue. There are days when a man can be wearing the most expensive suit he owns and still look like someone whose confidence has been skinned off. I did not invite him into the kitchen. I took him straight to the living room, where the camera still watched quietly from the corner. He did not apologize right away. "My son was never raised to begin with weakness." "You ruined everything," he said. "No, I stopped you before you went too far." He gave a bitter laugh, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Do you really think I'm a monster? Do you think people who do cruel things always have to look like monsters?" "I was only trying to protect the family assets," he snapped. "Protect them from who?" "From disorder, from conflict later on, from you." "From me what?" "From not being able to manage everything yourself anymore." Hearing that, my heart did not feel a sharp pain anymore. Maybe it had shattered long ago, and now it was only dry pieces of broken porcelain scraping against each other. I stood up, took out William's unfinished letter, and placed it on the table. "Read it." He looked at the envelope as if it might bite him. Then he opened it and let his eyes move across the lines. I did not bother watching his face. I kept my eyes on the garden, where the rose bushes were being pressed down by the rain. The living room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. "Dad," his voice caught. "Yes, your father saw it before I did. He worried about you, and you still went on to write an even uglier version of the story with your own hands." I took a document Martin had prepared out of the file. "This is the final boundary." He looked at the paper and did not even bother reaching for it. "You will go to therapy for at least 1 year if you still want any chance of seeing me. No direct contact. Everything goes through attorneys. You are not to set foot in any house that belongs to me. As for Sophie and Liam, I will handle that separately without going through you. You're turning me into a stranger? You didn't lose your mother today, David. You started losing her the day you began treating her like an obstacle that needed to be pushed aside. I had never seen David so silent. Not the silence of calculation anymore, but the stunned silence of someone who had just heard the family door slam shut right in front of him. He left after 10 minutes. No hug, no glance back. As I watched the car disappear beyond the maples, I realized the most painful thing was not pushing your own child away. It was having to do it just to keep yourself. A year passed. I was still in the old house. The roses still bloomed, and the greenhouse still gathered dew every morning. I still did my own grocery shopping and kept track of my own spending. I still left William's old sweater on the chair, though by then I no longer blamed myself every time I washed it. Life was still quiet, but not the silence of someone who had given in. It was the peace of someone who had stopped compromising with what was wrong. Laura and I grew closer, not in some overly eager, compensating way. She just started showing up more often, quietly and steadily. Calls for no particular reason. A photo of a half-dead basil plant on her windowsill, taking me to follow-up appointments I did not truly need. Sometimes love is nothing more than those small things, a steady rhythm of messages, or a motion sensor light installed outside the porch because your daughter knows you sometimes forget to turn the light on after dark. Sophie came to see me from time to time. At first, everything was handled very carefully, with a go-between, clear arrangements, and absolutely nothing done through David. I did not want to drag the children into the adults' war. I only wanted to leave them one door that would not be locked by their parents' mistakes. David did go to therapy, and he started writing letters. Some I opened, some I did not. The first one I read was in the 7th month. His handwriting was still beautiful, the lines still neat and controlled, as if even his emotions had been carefully aligned on the page. Mom, I'm not writing this to beg for your forgiveness right away. For the first time in my life, I'm beginning to understand that caring and control are not the same thing. I don't know exactly where that trait in me came from. Maybe from work pressure. Maybe from always trying to step out from under Dad's shadow. Or maybe simply because I could not stand the feeling of watching you grow older while not holding the power to decide everything. I know none of those reasons excuse what I did. I just want you to know that I'm trying to look straight at the truth now, without defending myself. I folded the letter and sat there in silence. Not because I had turned to stone, but because by then tears were no longer something I needed in order to confirm anything. That letter did not erase the past, and it was not enough to make me open the door and let him back in. But it did show that David was beginning to stand in front of a mirror without trying to fix the lighting first. One late summer afternoon, Sophie sat with me in the greenhouse, helping me trim dried lavender stems. The sunlight slanting through the glass made her hair glow like honey. Children who grow up inside family fractures often mature in ways no one ever wanted for them. "Grandma," she asked, still staring at the flower pot, "do you think Dad will really change?" I stopped clipping for a few seconds. This is the kind of question adults answer wrong most easily, either by planting false hope or dumping their own bitterness onto a child's head. I wanted to do neither. "You don't have to guess," I said. "Just let time answer." She thought about it for a while, then nodded. "So it's like a plant, right? You can't look at it for one day and know. You have to watch it for a long time to see whether it's truly coming back to life or just looking green for a while." I smiled. "Yes, almost exactly like that." She placed her hand on mine. "I hate the feeling that everything is broken." "Everything breaks sooner or later in one way or another," I said. "What matters is not letting that brokenness swallow you." She said nothing else, only squeezed my hand gently. Someone once asked me, after everything, what truly made me feel I had won. Was it David being humiliated in front of the family? Was it the investigation, the cases taken away from him, or his marriage standing on the edge of collapse? Was it that all the doors he had tried to open for himself ultimately slammed shut in front of him? No, those were only consequences. They were not the goal I had aimed for. The real answer lived somewhere else. It lived in the fact that I did not sign away my own disappearance just to keep the surface of the family peaceful. It lived in the fact that I forced my son to live with one truth he could never rewrite. that there had been a day when his own mother looked him straight in the eye, understood exactly what he was trying to do, and closed that door before he could step through it. I lost many things after this. I lost the last illusion that the love between a mother and child can stop someone from doing evil. I lost the pride I once felt in the successful son I used to speak of so proudly at every gathering. And I lost the late innocence of being 65. That belief that if you love enough and sacrifice enough, your children will never treat you like a problem to be handled. But in return, I got myself back. I regained the right to decide, regained my voice on the papers that carried my name. I kept the clarity people had almost used as an excuse to push me aside, and most importantly, I learned how to draw boundaries without feeling like a bad mother. Many times I wished William were still alive to know I had read that letter. I wished he were still sitting in that familiar brown leather chair, listening to me tell him everything, and then sighing. I knew the boy a long time ago. I wished I had not had to fight alone. But life never returns the dead just because the present is unbearably hard. Some evenings, sitting alone in the living room with the jazz William loved playing softly, I think back to David as a little boy. I remember his tiny hand gripping mine tightly when we crossed the street. I remember how he sobbed in 7th grade when a friend betrayed him. It is bitter beyond words that the child who once needed his mother to teach him that not everything you want belongs to you grew up into a man who thought he could manage his own mother with a few lines of legal trickery. Love does not disappear even when it has been betrayed. That is the most painful part of all. I still love my son, but I learned a painful lesson late in life. Love is not permission for someone else to harm you, and being a mother does not mean signing your name to every wound your children cause. So I accepted that everything had changed. What mattered was that I was still myself, not reshaped by that pain into someone unrecognizable. That was enough. At this point in my life, my own presence had become the safest harbor I knew. 1 year and 2 months after that meeting in Martin's office, David sent his 4th letter. It was shorter, with less explaining and far less of that cleverness he used to wrap around everything. One passage made me go still. I think before this I was always afraid of not being in control. Now I understand that maybe that's why I feared hearing you say no more than anything. Not because of the money, but because if you refused me, then I would no longer be the strongest person in the room. I'm ashamed even to write that. I folded the letter, put it in the drawer, and went out to the garden. That afternoon the sunlight was so clear, and the roses burned with a color so beautiful it almost did not look real. I stood quietly by the rose bed William had planted, and thought that shame, if it is real, is a strange kind of seed. It is neither beautiful nor pleasant, but sometimes it is the only thing that can begin to grow once the shell of arrogance has finally been stripped away. I still have not given David back his old place, and I probably never will. There will be no tearful reunion, no family dinner with everyone holding hands and saying everything is behind us now. Some things are never behind us. They simply settle, change shape, and force us to live differently. I'm no longer sitting around waiting for someone else to change so I can finally have peace. That is the biggest difference in me now. I used to think peace meant other people treating me kindly, when children were understanding, when families stopped making each other miserable, and when phone calls no longer arrived carrying dread. I waited for that kind of peace the way people wait for a late spring. But now I understand that real peace begins with something that doesn't sound soft at all. Boundaries. Boundaries are having the courage to lock the door you used to leave cracked open because you were afraid of hurting someone's feelings. They are saying no without feeling the need to explain yourself for the 10th time. They are taking yourself to the doctor to protect your own life, even when your heart is breaking because your own child has questioned you. They are sending the letter where it needs to go instead of sitting alone and crying in shame. Boundaries are accepting that people may call you cold, rigid, or too harsh, as long as every night, when I look in the mirror, I can still meet my own eyes without seeing a woman who signed her own name to let other people erase her from her own life. I do not know who David will become. I do not know whether therapy will ever reach the part of him that is truly human. Maybe one day he will grow enough to understand that power without love is just another form of poverty dressed in expensive clothes. And maybe he won't. But I no longer need to guess in order to keep living. I have my own time now, I have my garden, my quiet mornings, half-finished books, lunches with Eleanor, and weekends when Laura comes by. What remains of my life may not be whole, but it belongs entirely to me. Sometimes, sitting alone in the late afternoon light streaming through the old window pane, I think again about William's unfinished letter. I will... He never had the chance to finish that sentence. Maybe I wrote the rest of it for him with my own life. I will protect you. I will warn you. I will not let you be erased from your own home. William did not get to write those words, but he left me enough clarity to begin paying attention. And the part about facing the truth, the part about acting, the part about locking the door before it was too late. I did that myself. If someone asked me today what hurt me the most, I would not talk about the paperwork, the doctor's appointment, or David's sharp words. What hurt the most was realizing that at some point, my son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an obstacle that needed to be neatly cleared away. But if they asked me what made me strongest, I would have an answer for that too. It was the moment I stopped asking other people for permission to trust my own instincts. The moment I looked at that dark blue folder in David's hands, closed it, set it down, and said, "I'm going to have Martin look at this first." Just one simple sentence. But sometimes an entire life turns on a sentence like that. And maybe only at this age have I finally understood something very simple. Peace does not come from managing to keep someone in your life. It comes from no longer losing yourself. If my story touched some corner of your heart, please gently like, follow, and subscribe so you can stay with me for the next stories. I would also really love to know where you're listening from, and whether there has ever been a time in your life when you had to learn how to set boundaries with your own family.